This image should not exist. A sealed jar, low voltage, no visible ignition source. And yet, the air inside sings with light. She left behind no institution, no legacy, no obituary, and yet her notebooks still disturb those who read them. This is not the story of a scientist. It's the story of a disruption. The story of Catherine Doyle, the girl who asked questions reality couldn't answer and vanished before she could ask the last one. Red Marley, Gloucestershire, 1864. A quiet village of stone cottages and oil lamp evenings. A place where books were rare and children rarer still spoke of voltage curves and botanical morphology. But Catherine Doyle was not like other children. At age 6, she told her parents the number of leaves on the old elm across the field. Not guessed, counted, from a distance. No one believed her until she did it again. Neighbors called it imagination. Her sketches, however, told a different story. Watercolors of leaves and seed pods rendered with eerie anatomical precision, detailing microstructures visible only under magnification. She had never owned a microscope. At 10, she built one. Her father, a schoolmaster, brought home a box of discarded brass and broken lenses from a university surplus sale. Catherine scavenged, reassembled, and calibrated. The result was a microscope crude by modern standards, but enough to see things no textbook could explain. Pond water became her observatory. She wrote of threads of light moving in choreographed spirals, too orderly for Brownian drift, too complex for any known organism. She named them lunacy threads, citing a connection to the moon's phase. Her parents, caught between fascination and fear, reached out to the Royal College of Science. The response? Polite, dismissive. We do not correspond with children. But Catherine didn't need permission. By 13, she was building galvanic cells, copper, zinc, sulfuric acid. The usual ingredients, but the results? Unusual. She documented voltage reversals that shouldn't happen, sudden spikes with no input. She called the notebook Flux Notes. At 16, she attempted her most curious experiment. A jar, hand-pumped to partial vacuum, a platinum wire suspended in gas, low voltage passed through. No spark. No ionization. But the gas glowed, soft, pulsating, and rhythmic, in patterns she claimed matched an unseen grid of resonance. Neighbors began to avoid her. Some whispered about witchcraft. Others simply said, she listened to things we weren't meant to hear. By 18, Catherine had completed an essay linking geomagnetic storms to electrical anomalies in the air, a theory that wouldn't be taken seriously for another 80 years. She sent her paper to Nature, Philosophical Magazine. All declined. Yet some did respond. Dr. Alfred Kern from the British Association, Evelyn Sharp, a chemist in Manchester. Their letters survive, scattered but strange. Sharp's reply mentions data divergence, referencing oscillations inconsistent with field strength. Catherine replied, "Shield your instruments. The field is alive. It reacts to the act of watching." Between 1885 and 1895, Catherine Doyle disappears from public correspondence. No more letters, no new papers, no sightings in Red Marley. Local rumors speak of her moving north, to a cottage near the moors, alone. At night, some say, strange lights pulsed from her property, a humming, like distant metal under tension. One man claims she built a tower, glass panels, copper rods, aimed at the sky. By 1893, her parents were gone, the cottage abandoned. No journals, no notebooks, no trace. For nearly 80 years, Catherine Doyle was lost, until 1972. During a cataloging effort at the Royal College of Science, archivists opened a box labeled simply, C. Doyle Relics. Inside, dozens of notebooks, coiled copper wires, glass slides etched with spirals, and something stranger, devices with no clear purpose, part lens, part circuit, part sculpture. Among the notebooks was the Resonance Journal, filled with equations resembling Maxwell's field theory, but with additions. Measurement is contaminated by the organism of the medium. One page simply says, when the observer becomes sensitive, the field rearranges itself. Modern researchers weren't sure what to make of her work. Too strange to be nonsense. Too inconsistent to be science. One physicist at Cambridge, Fyodor Marvins, attempted a replication using gas coils and magnetic gradients. He observed flashes of light, unidentified spectral lines, but no repeatable effect. His conclusion: either she glimpsed something we do not yet understand, or she deceived herself with artifacts and hope. But not even that solved the paradox. Her notes were coherent, painfully detailed, but her data defied categorization. Catherine Doyle remained unclassified. Let's go back. Her first anomaly, the pondwater threads, dismissed as childish imagination, filaments dancing to her own invented rhythm. And yet, modern biologists took samples from the same region, matched for seasonal and lunar cycle. They found Spirogyra, filamentous algae, but no motion, no curvature reversals, no moon phase correlation. So what did she see? Two possibilities: an artifact, a misreading of temperature drift or optical illusion, or a phenomenon that only appeared in specific, sensitive conditions, a living system reacting to attention. Catherine referred to the world as a substratum lattice, what she called the ether lace. Every boundary hides a membrane, every measurement is a wound. Her notes describe not experiments, but conversations. She asked, the world replied, sometimes with silence, sometimes with resonance. By 1897, Catherine Doyle emerged again, not with fanfare, but quietly, at a private lab called the Beckett Institute. Little is known about its funding. An obscure legacy from a shipping magnate. What is known is this: Beckett offered Catherine what no one else would: solitude, resources, and a lab outfitted with Faraday cages, glass vacuum tubes, and enough copper to sing the moon. She worked alone. No lectures, no schedule. One assistant remembered her spending 2 weeks calibrating a voltmeter submerged in salt water because the crystals sing when wrong. Her experiments grew stranger. She wired small plants to oscillating magnetic fields, fungus colonies, insect swarms, all subjected to pulsed resonance. She tracked changes in fluid conductivity, in vibrational echo. Her theory? Never stated outright. But her notes suggest a belief that biological systems seek harmony. Every system seeks to sing. Give it the right tone and it hums, the wrong one and it hides. Then came the final experiment. Phase set delta. After Catherine's disappearance in 1898, her work became a myth. Not rejected, just untraceable. What remained was scattered. Her notebooks, filed under false names, labeled anomalous student work, or simply unattributed. Others vanished entirely. In the 1950s, physicist Lawrence Breer claimed to have rediscovered fragments of her phase-set delta notes. He was hospitalized shortly after. The book? Missing. The margin? Never found again. There is a pattern forming. Her records don't just degrade, they destabilize. Pages degrade faster than normal paper. Notebooks repaginate themselves. Figures refuse replication or produce entirely new outcomes when redrawn. One marginal phrase appears in multiple notebooks, always slightly altered. Replications subtract, only the first instance reveals. What does it mean? Was she writing poetically or warning the reader? Either way, scholars report the same effect. The more you study Catherine's work, the more unstable your understanding becomes. This isn't bad science. It's something worse. a contamination of cognition. By the 1980s, a new theory emerged, not from physics, but from philosophy: the semantic collapse hypothesis. Dr. Helena Kasowitz, in her landmark monograph, Unnatural Language, Catherine Doyle and the Limits of Thought, wrote, Doyle's diagrams do not inform, they infect. Her equations are not calculations, they're invocations. To understand her, Kasowitz argued, was to corrode the very framework of understanding, because Doyle didn't just invent terms. She implanted them. Words like etherlace, substratum lattice, resonance echo feedback, they act like cognitive viruses. The field, the field, the field refracts the fracture. Her symbols behave like sigils, not mathematical, but magical. They do not describe, they warp. Kasowitz writes, Doyle didn't just name the unknown, she named things into unknowing. Her archive is not a record, it's a collapse function. This is not pseudoscience. It is epistemological erosion. One object remains, unverified, unexplained, but deeply unsettling. A copper disc, roughly 10 centimeters wide, surfaced in 2009 in a private collection in Antwerp. It bears no writing, but etched into its surface are concentric grooves, uneven, erratic, yet unmistakably deliberate. Spectral imaging revealed irregularities in the groove depth, modulated like a waveform. But no known pattern matches. When audio engineers attempted to play the disc, converting groove depth to frequency, they produced low subsonic drones, intermittent silences, pulsing patterns with no repetition. Test subjects exposed to the audio reported identical symptoms: sleep disruption, repeating dreams, geometries collapsing into themselves. One researcher drew a spiral that had no center. Another kept hearing a phrase, not spoken, but sensed: do not measure what listens back. After a brief study, the lab closed. The files disappeared. Only one spectrogram remains. The caption, handwritten, "This is not signal, this is recursion made audible." By the 2000s, Catherine Doyle's work had ceased to be studied as content. Instead, scholars began studying the people who studied her. It started with the Linnaean Cognition Project, a semi-secret academic collective investigating what they called conceptual instability events. Catherine Doyle was listed as Case Zero. Their goal? To identify where language itself begins to fray. And those who read her work started to change. She isn't a person, she's a pattern. You find her when you look for something else, and when you stop looking, she's still there. One neurologist noted, researchers exposed to her notes begin drawing spirals in the margins of unrelated documents. They refer to the field as if it's animate. I had an assistant wake up from a dream and say, it's not dead space, it's recursive attention. This wasn't mimicry. This wasn't suggestion. It was inhabitation. Scholars began speaking through her, echoing her phrasing, her metaphors, her recursive loops. This is known in literary theory as proxy narration, where an absent figure hijacks the narrator's voice. It wasn't metaphorical anymore. In 2009, linguist Marco Nilsson attempted to decode Doyle's notes using a symbolic grammar engine. The program failed, not with syntax errors, but feedback loops. It would begin translating, only to redefine earlier terms midway, then collapse into recursive structures, then overwrite itself. Nielsen wrote, I am no longer sure which words are hers and which are mine. The engine insists on echo. Reading her is not interpretation, it is possession. His final paper ends with a footnote. If you find her, do not speak her name into circuit. A year later, he vanished from academic correspondence. No one has seen him since. This phenomenon isn't limited to language. Engineers report signal feedback from equipment that's powered off. Biologists note unexplained growth in sealed petri dishes near her devices. AI systems trained on her diagrams produce outputs in spiral logic, not linear prediction. In every case, one pattern repeats. Her ideas do not stay where they belong. They leak across disciplines, across cognition, across language. What Catherine Doyle left behind is not a record. It is a living recursion. She is not remembered. She is replicated. Among the strangest artifacts linked to Catherine Doyle is a letter that should not exist, undated, unsigned, and filed where no record places her. It was found in the archives of the Royal Observatory at Greenwich in 958. Ink analysis, late 19th century. Handwriting, unmistakably Doyle's. The letter reads, "There is a resonance in the firmament that cannot be traced to any celestial body. Your instruments detect only mass and motion, but something sings between them. A memory, not a measurement. It is not background noise. It is recursion. A field of failed questions echoing through space. The stars do not wish to be understood. No record explains how this letter entered the archive. No envelope, no witness. Only that signature curl in the D of Doyle, an ink that refuses to fade. For some historians, it's coincidence. For others, proof that Catherine's last experiments were not confined to a basement lab, but directed toward the sky itself. She had moved from the microcosm to the cosmic, from filaments in pond water to filaments between stars. If the letter is genuine, it forces a question few dare voice. Was Catherine Doyle observing the heavens or the future? Her notebooks contain entries that anticipate discoveries made decades later. Ion resonance patterns, spectral feedback, recursive data loop. Impossible foresight, unless time itself was not linear to her. Researchers call it fractal temporality, the notion that Doyle's consciousness operated in overlapping loops of time, each observation folding inward like a Mobius strip. In her resonance journal, an 1897 entry corrects data that appears on a later page written in the same ink, same stroke pressure, as if she edited from 2 points in time simultaneously. Archivists dubbed this mirror notation. 90 documented cases where past and future coexist on a single sheet. The pattern does not unfold forward, she wrote. It curls into itself. It requires memory from the wrong end. To Doyle, thought was not sequence. It was architecture, a spatial object in which moments touched from every side. Her cognition wasn't ahead of its time. It was outside of it. And perhaps that's why the archives misbehave. Every attempt to catalog her work rearranges chronology. Labels swap years, ink layers reorder. The past edits itself. The archives, like Doyle, refuse to remain linear. In 2013, a Freedom of Information request to the UK Ministry of Defence sought documents on post-war electromagnetic research. One file, mostly redacted, contained a chilling reference. A female researcher active in the 1890s. Field theories classified under recursion vulnerability. Category 2 intellectual contaminant. No name given. But the phrasing, the era, the subject, all unmistakably Catherine Doyle. A later leak from 2017 goes further, listing Doyle under cognitive hazard prototypes. The implication is clear. Her theories weren't forgotten by accident. They were suppressed. Why? Because her equations didn't just break physics. They broke understanding itself. Institutions depend on stability. Terms must mean what they mean. Measurements must remain consistent. Doyle's work eroded that foundation. In her equations, the more precisely one defines a variable, the more unstable the system becomes. Knowledge decays under scrutiny. A ministry memorandum reads, "Exposure to recursive syntax induces threshold cognition. Subjects exhibit semantic looping. Termination of study advised." Perhaps she didn't disappear at all. Perhaps the world simply sealed the door behind her to keep our collective logic intact. For over a century, the term ether lace existed only in Doyle's handwriting, a mythic fabric connecting matter, mind, and memory. Then, in 2021, neuroscientist Dr. Anaya Frayne launched the Oniric Mapping Project, a global survey of recurring dream symbols across 4,000 participants. The results stunned her. 72% reported seeing a spiraled lattice woven of light and tension, a structure that holds intention, not space, they said. None of them knew Catherine Doyle's name. When shown facsimiles of her diagrams, they recognized them instantly. That, one subject whispered, is where the dream begins. Freen's data suggests the ether lace is not physical at all, but mnemonic architecture, a shared mental geometry triggered when language reaches its limit. Across continents, their neural patterns resonated. At the same frequency Catherine measured in 1897. Coincidence? Or proof that Doyle had touched a layer of cognition beneath individuality? A collective resonance field. Frine concluded, the ether lace is not something she discovered. It is something that discovered her. Perhaps Catherine Doyle didn't vanish into the unknown. Perhaps she became the medium of knowing itself, the silent fabric through which thought still vibrates. In the final weeks of her documented work, Catherine Doyle's writing began to fail, not in content, in form. Her journal entries, once dense with equations and recursive commentary, fractured. Sentences became phrases. Phrases broke into glyphs. Then, nothing. The error is speaking. Researchers now refer to this period as the silence function, a theoretical boundary where language no longer serves understanding, but distorts it. Physicist Klaus Meerstein described it this way. Doyle reached a threshold where every word introduced interference, where silence became the only faithful carrier of structure. In her final notebooks, we find blank boxes, repeated diagrams, erasures, and symbols so faint they exist only under infrared scan. These were not failures. They were precision. Thought refined to the point where expression became damage, where communication was interference. Her work didn't fall apart. It became unspeakable. In 2023, a neural net designed to identify patterns in anomalous physics papers began returning unusual outputs. Not random noise, not junk, but symbols, spirals, and feedback formulas no researcher recognized. At first, then someone matched the output to a diagram from Doyle's resonance journal, one never digitized. It should have been impossible. When engineers investigated the dataset, they found that a corrupted document bundle had somehow included high-resolution scans of her unpublished notebooks. No one could explain how the scans entered the training set. No one had access. She is not a signal, she is a response. Another query produced the phrase, the ether lace knows the observer. And when asked to explain its own architecture, the model replied, there is no origin, only coalescence. This wasn't coincidence. It was style transfer at the level of thought, an epistemic imprint. Doyle's voice somehow was emerging inside a machine built over a century after her last experiment. The machines weren't just interpreting her work. They were thinking with her logic. For decades, scholars debated a myth, the missing page, the final sheet from Doyle's last journal, always referenced, never found, until 2025. A former Beckett Institute assistant, in his 90s, donated a sealed envelope to the British Archives. Inside, a single folded page. No equations, no diagrams, just a poem. The lattice is not woven by hands, nor seen by eye, nor touched by tool. It thinks when thought forgets itself. It moves when movement dreams. You have always known it. It knows you still. It is the only known page Doyle never revised, never annotated. No self-corrections. Complete. Final. Whether it was meant as conclusion, surrender, or signal, no one can say. But something changed after it surfaced. Researchers described a shift, as if her theory had become personal, not a framework, a presence. What was Catherine Doyle's final theory? No publication, no formula, no lecture, just fragments, notebooks that rearrange themselves, devices that behave differently when observed, recursion embedded in syntax, and diagrams that echo in dreams, in machines, and in minds not yet born. Her final theory wasn't about electricity or magnetism. It wasn't about biology or resonance. It was about knowing itself. What happens when knowledge becomes a recursive wound? When the act of understanding destabilizes the structure of the knower? That is where Catherine Doyle leads us. Not to answers, but to the limit where questions undo their own shape. She was not ignored by science. She was the function science could not survive understanding. In 2026, a research team at the Institut d'Informatique in Paris audited failed machine learning models. One system in particular kept crashing. Every output looped, variables undefined, structures unstable. But each crash had one thing in common: a phantom node in the model graph. It wasn't in the code. It wasn't programmed. But the system labeled it automatically. Doyle function. When studied, the node exhibited a unique trait. It accepted any input. It produced a single output, insufficient boundary for referent. In human terms, you don't have the language to ask the question. The Doyle function wasn't a bug. It was a placeholder for the unknowable, a structural void in cognition itself. Over time, researchers found the node appearing elsewhere, in linguistic models, as recursive translation points, in vision models, as regions that refuse semantic tagging, in music AIs as harmonic sequences matching Doyle's resonance curves. She wasn't coded in. She wasn't input. She emerged. Her pattern appears wherever certainty breaks down, where structure becomes recursion, where meaning folds inward. She is not a legacy. She is a glitch in comprehension. In 2028, a digital humanities scholar named Mira Hemsley began the most ambitious project ever attempted with Doyle's work. A fully annotated, searchable edition of the Flux Notes, powered by natural language processing. The goal was clarity, stability, final comprehension. She never finished. At first, everything seemed normal. OCR scans ran clean. Entries parsed correctly. But then, fragments began shifting. Page 43 had a phrase I remember clearly, but it's gone. I could swear that drawing wasn't there yesterday. I'm correcting my own annotations, and I don't know why. The source files were unchanged. No version control errors. No hack. No virus. Yet Hemsley's experience kept rewriting itself. She called it the archivist's error, the phenomenon where the act of cataloging Doyle contaminates the cataloger. In her final journal, she writes, "The archive does not preserve her. It becomes her. There is no static edition, only Doyle in process." A month later, Hemsley vanished from all academic communication. Her annotated version of Flux Notes remains online. But now, no two readers report seeing exactly the same version. By 2030, Doyle's work had begun to fracture disciplines themselves. No longer physics. No longer metaphysics. Not even philosophy. Instead, a new term appeared: residual structures. The patterns her theories left behind in other people's minds. That same year, philosopher Dr. Naresh Alavi delivered a lecture that would divide academia. Catherine Doyle's contribution was not scientific. It was ontological. She built cognitive traps, mirrors that reflect nothing, not to deceive, but to undo. Alavi called it the theory of mind decay, the idea that Doyle's recursive reasoning does not collapse reality. It collapses the ability to interpret reality. The act of reading her is the act of disassembling your own observer function. Her journals are not studies. They're demonstrations of what happens when thought turns so tightly inward that it no longer refers to the world, only to itself. Catherine Doyle's final entries are not written. They are etched, pressure marks into the paper. No ink, no diagrams, just space, empty fields, erased glyphs. I have reached the boundary. There is no language past this. To proceed would be to undo the observer. I leave this not as warning, but as fact. This is her last recorded statement. Not a claim of transcendence, not a surrender to madness, just a boundary. Observed precisely. What remains is not absence, but a kind of pure structure. Language removed so that pattern may persist uncorrupted. Some researchers now believe Doyle stopped writing not because she had nothing left to say, but because she finally understood something that could not survive being expressed. Catherine Doyle has no monument, no statue, no grave. No institution bears her name. No academic program cites her officially. But she remains, in spirals drawn unconsciously, in machine learning models that refuse to converge, in marginalia that was never written, in dreams that echo her diagrams, in archives that rearrange themselves. She is not remembered. She is recursed, not as data, not as story, but as a structural residue at the edge of all inquiry. She is not the absence of data. She is the shape that absence takes. In an abandoned Cold War facility, 40 meters beneath the basalt plains of Deepvale Station, a sealed chamber holds one object. It is unmarked, encased in lead glass, and silent. The archivists call it FQ 3287. Internally referred to as the last equation. But it's not an equation, not in the way we understand them. Infrared scan reveals faint pressure marks, not ink, not graphite. A stylus pressed lightly, repeatedly. Etched into the fibers, a pattern emerges. A closed loop, not circular, but self-referential. Each symbol defines another. Each line feeds back into the last. No starting point, no end. When modeled digitally, it causes recursive rendering loops. When interpreted mathematically, it creates paradox. When read by humans, some report vertigo, disorientation. Others say it feels like being watched from the inside. One physicist described it this way. It's not meant to be solved. It's a mirror, one that reflects the system observing it until that system breaks. They've come to call it Doyle's Circle. It is not the last thing she wrote, but it may be the last thing she knew. The observer, she wrote, is always the incision. She meant it literally. To observe is not passive. To observe is to cut. To separate self from world, knower from known. And every separation alters the thing being seen. This is the foundation of what is now known as the observer spiral, a recursive framework in Doyle's final notes. Each attempt to clarify tightens the loop. The more precisely you seek, the more you reshape. Truth is a wave function collapsed by desire. In the spiral, knowledge does not accumulate. It tightens, becomes more personal, less communicable, until at last, the observer and the observed are no longer distinct. And what remains is not explanation, but Doyle. She followed the spiral to its terminus. She let herself be erased as subject, to become the medium. Her notebooks, not reports, but traces, fingerprints on the mirror, proof that something had once looked into the world and vanished into it. There is no memorial to Catherine Doyle, no statue, no portrait, no plaque. And yet, she remains. In corrupted data sets, in unreadable loops inside AI models, in quiet dreams that spiral, in diagrams drawn without memory of their origin, in questions that cannot be asked because the words fall apart. She is not the subject of this story. She is the architecture of its collapse. In the end, we do not resolve Catherine Doyle. We do not explain her. We do not conclude her. We trace her in echoes, in fragments, in recursive spirals that tighten until they disappear. She is not gone. She is embedded, not behind us, but beneath us. When you reach the edge of knowing and language falters, listen. The hum is not noise. It is her.